Before her death, Jeannie Seely revealed the truth about Mel Tillis, and it was a truth many people never realized they had misunderstood. For decades they stood as pillars of country music, sharing stages, histories, and a world where legends were built as much on perception as on reality. The applause never stopped, yet something essential about Mel Tillis quietly slipped past the public eye. Jeannie Seely lived long enough to see stories harden into assumptions and memories turn selective. Known as Miss Country Soul, she watched careers rise, fade, and sometimes become distorted by time. Mel Tillis, celebrated for his songs and his laughter, became an image almost larger than the man himself, and that image followed him even after his death in November 2017. As Jeannie reached the final chapter of her own life, she chose to set the record straight, not with drama, but with clarity and intention. What was it about Mel Tillis that history got wrong, and why did Jeannie Seely feel that only then was the right moment to finally tell the truth? Jeannie Seely earned the name Miss Country Soul, not because it sounded good on a poster, but because she lived inside the music long after others stepped away. In an industry built on momentum and youth, she became known as the woman who stayed. While careers flared and faded around her, Jeannie remained planted in the same world, returning to the same stage, carrying the same emotional weight year after year. Longevity, in her case, was not an accident. It was a decision that asked something from her every single time. Born Marilyn Jeannie Seely on July 6, 1940, in Titusville, Pennsylvania, she did not arrive in Nashville with shortcuts waiting. The road from Pennsylvania to Tennessee demanded patience, resilience, and a willingness to be overlooked more than once. Nashville in the early 1960s was crowded with ambition, yet Jeannie's voice carried something different. It held restraint, vulnerability, and a sense of emotional honesty that did not bend easily to trends. That difference took time to be noticed, but when it finally was, it left a mark. Everything shifted in March 1966 with the release of Don't Touch Me. Written by Hank Cochran, the song did more than climb charts. It gave voice to women who had learned to hide their boundaries. Reaching number 2 on the Billboard Hot Country Singles chart, the record did not shout empowerment, but it insisted on it. Jeannie sang restraint not as weakness, but as strength, and women listening understood the difference immediately. The song earned her a Grammy the following year, yet even then, she never treated it as a finish line. Instead, that moment became the beginning of a longer commitment. Fame arrived, but she did not chase its noise. She focused on the work, returning, night after night, to the Grand Ole Opry, a place that would become both her home and her witness. Inducted in September 1967, Jeannie did not simply join the Opry. She anchored herself there. Over time, she appeared on that stage 5,397 times, more than any artist in its history. Numbers like that are not built on applause alone. They are built on endurance. Staying that long meant accepting what came with it. The Opry is not just a stage, it is a timeline. Every return brings reminders of who once stood beside you and no longer does. Jeannie watched friends age out, fall ill, or disappear quietly from the circuit. She watched voices that once filled the room fade into memory, yet she kept showing up, carrying the weight of what was gone while offering what remained. That kind of presence changes a person. There was no single era that defined her. When the spotlight moved elsewhere, she did not follow it. Instead, she became part of the structure holding the place together. Younger artists arrived and found her already there, steady and unpretentious. A reminder that survival in country music was not always about reinvention. Sometimes it was about faithfulness to the work itself. Jeannie Seely earned her place by staying when leaving would have hurt less. She stayed when the spotlight shifted, when the industry chased younger voices, and when the silence left by absent friends grew heavier than the applause. Remaining present meant witnessing the gradual disappearance of the people who had shaped her world, the songwriters, the singers, and the voices that once stood beside her under the same lights. Mel Tillis entered country music as a songwriter long before he became a familiar face, building a career that stretched across 6 decades and left its imprint on nearly every corner of the genre. His catalog grew to include more than 1,000 songs, many of them carried to the charts by voices other than his own. Titles like I Ain't Never, Good Woman Blues, and Coca-Cola Cowboy became part of the country music vocabulary, not because they chased trends, but because they understood the language of ordinary life. Over time, that understanding turned Mel Tillis into a constant presence, someone audiences trusted to speak plainly, even when the melody was light. His public image often leaned toward warmth and humor, and that familiarity made him easy to love. On stage, laughter flowed as naturally as the songs, and fans came to expect the easy charm that followed him wherever he went. Yet woven into that ease was a challenge he never tried to hide. Mel Tillis lived with a stutter, a documented part of his life that shaped how he spoke, how he performed, and how he was perceived. When he sang, the stutter vanished, a contrast that fascinated audiences and became part of his identity. Offstage, the effort required to navigate everyday conversation remained, and over time he learned to turn that difficulty into something disarming rather than distancing. That choice shaped the way the public saw him. Humor became a bridge, allowing listeners to feel comfortable while he carried the heavier work quietly. The laughter often came first, and the understanding came later, if at all. What many did not fully recognize was how much discipline and preparation sat behind the relaxed delivery. The ease audiences felt was earned, not automatic. Like a smooth river hiding its current, his performances masked the concentration and control required to make everything seem effortless. Recognition followed, as it often does, after years of consistency. Mel Tillis was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, an acknowledgement of his songwriting, his recordings, and his lasting influence. In February 2012, he received the National Medal of Arts, one of the highest honors awarded to an American artist. By then, his voice had traveled far beyond radio playlists, settling into the cultural memory of the genre itself. These honors affirmed what fans already believed, that he was a cornerstone of country music. Still, awards tell only part of the story. Public recognition amplifies certain traits while leaving others in shadow. Mel Tillis became known for his humor and accessibility, traits that made him approachable and memorable. Yet behind that image lived the steady work of someone who had to be intentional with every word spoken aloud. The contrast between the man audiences laughed with and the man managing his own limitations remained largely unseen. There was an ease about Mel Tillis that defined his public image. To the crowd, he was the open road, smooth and familiar, inviting everyone along for the ride. Beneath that surface, there were careful turns and constant adjustments, navigated without drawing attention to themselves. The result was a career that felt easy to witness, even though it demanded more than it revealed. By the time Mel Tillis reached the later years of his life, his legacy appeared settled. Hits, honors, and laughter had defined the public memory. Yet the fuller measure of any life is often held by those who stood close enough to see the effort behind the smile. Fame amplified his voice, but it did not tell his full story. How he was understood by those who truly knew him, lived in quieter spaces, beyond the reach of applause, and beyond the versions preserved for fans and historians alike. The Grand Ole Opry was more than a venue in the lives of Jeannie Seely and Mel Tillis. It functioned as a shared rhythm, a place that shaped not just careers but understanding. Night after night, year after year, the same stage absorbed the presence of artists who returned not for novelty, but for continuity. For those who stayed long enough, the Opry became a quiet record of time passing, and it was within that shared space that Seely and Tillis came to know one another, beyond introductions and headlines. Long-term membership at the Opry creates a kind of familiarity that resists easy definition. It is built in the pauses between performances, in the waiting rooms, and in the unspoken routines that repeat themselves over decades. Jeannie Seely and Mel Tillis occupied that space together for years, watching the same cycles unfold. They saw newcomers arrive with nervous excitement and veterans take final bows without ceremony. Those shared observations form bonds that rarely translate into liner notes or retrospective interviews, yet they carry weight all the same. What connected them was not a single defining moment, but repetition. They returned to the same hall, stood under the same lights, and adjusted to the same changes as the music industry shifted around them. That proximity fostered a mutual understanding rooted in experience rather than publicity. There is no verified record of a romantic connection, no documented controversy linking their names. What exists instead is something quieter, professional respect shaped by time and reinforced by consistency. There is meaning in what does not clamor for attention. The deepest relationships in public life often pass without declaration. Some unfold slowly, marked by recognition rather than revelation. Jeannie Seely and Mel Tillis shared the kind of familiarity that comes from seeing someone perform at their best and persist through their hardest seasons. Each understood what it meant to keep showing up long after the novelty had passed, and that shared endurance created a form of trust. Their story slows at this point because the truth does not announce itself with drama. It settles over time. In the Opry's hallways and green rooms, people learn who can be relied on, who listens, and who understands the quiet rules that govern survival. Jeannie Seely and Mel Tillis remained in that environment long enough for surface impressions to disappear. What endured was a clear understanding of one another as working artists, shaped by effort, consistency, and respect rather than image. Over time, that environment becomes a witness. The Opry holds the echoes of voices that once filled the room and no longer do. For those who remain, every return carries memory. Jeannie Seely experienced this acutely, watching familiar faces disappear while she and a smaller circle continued forward. Mel Tillis was part of that circle for many years, his presence woven into the ongoing life of the place they shared. When Mel Tillis died in November 2017, something shifted. Loss has a way of clarifying relationships, stripping them of exaggeration and revealing their true shape. For Jeannie Seely, his passing marked more than the end of a long career. It marked the loss of someone whose life had run alongside hers within the same space for decades. From that point forward, the way she spoke about him carried a different weight, shaped by absence rather than proximity. Proximity, not publicity, had defined their relationship. What they shared was built slowly, in a place that rewards those who stay long enough to be known. When Mel Tillis died in November 2017, tributes arrived quickly from across the country music world. Awards were listed, hits were replayed, and familiar stories resurfaced. Amid those public remembrances, Jeannie Seely offered words that stood apart not because they were louder, but because they were steadier. Her statement did not attempt to enlarge his legend. It aimed to place it back where it belonged. Jeannie spoke of loss with clarity rather than ceremony. She described Mel Tillis as one of the brightest lights in country music, but she did not stop at his success. She pointed instead to his humor, recalling how it stayed with her more than anything else. She spoke about the stories he told, the laughter he brought into rooms, and the sense that something irreplaceable had gone with him. Her words carried admiration, yet they were grounded in familiarity, not reverence from a distance. What stands out is what she chose not to do. Jeannie did not reshape Mel Tillis into a symbol or soften his life into a neat narrative. She did not elevate him beyond recognition, nor did she hint at hidden revelations. Her focus stayed on who he was in shared spaces, how he made people feel, and what he left behind through his presence as much as through his songs. In doing so, she resisted the urge to mythologize, offering remembrance without embellishment. Over time, those remarks began to travel beyond their original context. As online culture absorbed her words, they were reframed, shortened, and sometimes stretched into something she never claimed. Headlines and video titles hinted at revelations that did not exist, borrowing the weight of her voice to suggest drama she never introduced. The simplicity of her message became vulnerable to reinterpretation, not because it lacked meaning but because it refused spectacle. It is important to be clear. There is no verified record of Jeannie Seely revealing a dark secret about Mel Tillis. There was no exposé, no accusation, and no hidden chapter brought to light. What she offered was correction, not exposure. She reminded listeners that Mel Tillis was more than a caricature built from laughter and fame. He was a working artist, a storyteller, and a man whose humor carried effort behind it. That distinction mattered to her. Jeannie's insistence on accuracy reflected how she lived her own life. She had spent decades watching narratives simplify people she knew well. She understood how easily public memory smooths away complexity, leaving behind versions that feel complete but rarely are. By speaking plainly about Mel Tillis, she pushed back against that process, choosing honesty over exaggeration. What she revealed then was not hidden information, but perspective. She revealed how Mel Tillis existed in the lives of those who shared time and space with him, how his humanity outweighed his mythology, and how his legacy deserved care rather than inflation. The truth she shared did not shock because it was never meant to. It corrected the angle of the story, bringing it closer to the ground where real lives are lived. As Jeannie Seely moved into the final years of her own life, accuracy took on deeper meaning. She knew that words spoken near the end tend to last, often longer than intended. Preserving the truth became an act of respect, not only for Mel Tillis, but for the history they shared. By refusing spectacle, she ensured that what remained was something sturdier than rumor, something that could be trusted to endure. By the final stretch of Jeannie Seely's life, loss had become a familiar companion. Years of standing still while the world changed had already taught her how fragile memory could be. Yet the passing of her husband, Gene Ward, in December 2024, brought that truth closer to home. Grief at that stage does not arrive loudly. It settles in, reshaping how the past is held and how carefully it must be handled. For Jeannie, memory was no longer abstract. It was personal, immediate, and deserving of protection. That perspective shaped how she spoke about the people she had outlived. Having watched friends disappear and stories distort with time, she understood that exaggeration often does more harm than silence. Legends grow easily when those who knew the truth are no longer there to correct them. Jeannie resisted that drift. Her words about Mel Tillis reflected a lifetime spent observing how public narratives form and how quickly they lose balance. Her own death, in August 2025, gave those words a weight they did not originally carry. Once she was gone, there would be no revisions, no clarifications, no gentle course corrections offered backstage or in passing conversation. What she had said would stand on its own. That finality turned her reflections into something closer to a legacy statement, not only about Mel Tillis, but about how she believed lives should be remembered. It becomes clear, looking back, that her so-called reveal was never about unveiling something hidden. It was about guarding something real. She spoke the way someone speaks when they know exaggeration can be tempting, but ultimately empty. In choosing accuracy, she protected Mel Tillis from being flattened into a symbol that no longer resembled the man she knew. She preserved his humor without turning it into a mask, his success without turning it into mythology. Their story promises a revelation, yet the truth it points to is quieter and more meaningful. What Jeannie Seely revealed was not a secret, but a reminder. She reminded listeners that Mel Tillis was a working artist shaped by effort, persistence, and humanity. She reminded them that laughter can coexist with struggle, and that ease on stage does not erase the labor behind it. Those closest to him understood this instinctively, and Jeannie chose to speak from that place. Her approach reflected how she lived. Across decades at the Grand Ole Opry, she had watched history get rewritten by distance. She knew that memory needs anchors, people willing to say what was real, even when it lacks drama. By the end of her life, she had become one of those anchors herself. Her voice carried authority, not because it demanded attention, but because it had endured. Legacy, in her view, was shaped as much by restraint as by achievement. It lived in what was left unsaid, as much as in what was shared. Jeannie Seely did not attempt to redefine Mel Tillis for the world. She simply steadied the story, ensuring that what remained was honest, grounded, and true to the man she knew. In doing so, she left behind something stronger than revelation. She left behind trust. Jeannie Seely and Mel Tillis spent their lives inside a world that often turns people into symbols once they are gone. Applause lingers, stories grow larger, and details slowly blur. What Jeannie offered near the end of her life was not a dramatic farewell, but a steadying hand on a story that mattered to her. She reminded us that truth does not need decoration to endure. By choosing accuracy over exaggeration, she honored a man she knew as more than a public figure. She honored the shared spaces, the long years, and the quiet understanding that only comes from staying. In doing so, she also revealed something about herself, a belief that memory should be handled with care, especially when voices begin to disappear. What remains is not a secret uncovered, but a life clarified. Two artists, bound by time, place, and respect, leaving behind something honest. For more emotional stories, check out this video.